was hanging in the void, suspended by nothing but the magnetic clamps on my boots and a 50-foot tether that looked pitifully thin against the backdrop of infinite black. The only sound in the universe was the rasp of my own breathing and the low-level static hiss in my comms loop. It smelled like it always did inside a vacuum suit: stale rubber, old talcum powder, and the metallic tang of recycled air that had been through too many filters. My hands were steady, though. They always were. The welding torch in my grip vibrated, a comforting, mechanical purr that traveled up my forearm. I squeezed the trigger, and a blinding arc of white-hot plasma spat out, biting into the damaged hull plating of Station 4. The light was aggressive, violent. It threw sharp, dancing shadows inside my helmet, momentarily blinding the sensors before the auto-dimmer kicked in. I watched the molten metal pool and cool. In gravity, it would drip. Out here, it just settled, instantly freezing into a scarred, ugly gray scab on the station's skin. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold pressure. That was the job. I wasn't a scientist like Kira or a button pusher like Hudson. I was a welder. I trusted torque wrenches, tensile strength, and things I could hit with a hammer. "Weld complete on Sector 9, I muttered into the mic. "Cooling down." "Copy that, Banks," came the reply from the bridge. It was Sol. He sounded tired, his voice clipped. "Wrap it up. Shift's over in 10. I didn't answer. I switched off the torch and let it hang from my tool belt. The darkness rushed back in the moment the arc died, heavier than before. It felt physical, like deep water pressing against the glass of my faceplate. I leaned back, letting the magnetic boots hold my weight, and took a second to stretch my neck. Below me, or above, depending on how you looked at it, was the vast, indifferent expanse of the cosmos. We were deep out, past the shipping lanes, past the comfort of the patrolled sectors. I looked for Orion. It was a habit from back home in Ohio, sitting on the hood of my father's pickup. The hunter was always there. I found the belt easily enough, 3 bright studs in the velvet dark. Then, the left star twitched. I blinked hard, squeezing my eyes shut and shaking my head inside the helmet. Retinal fatigue, that's what the manual called it. You stare at a welding arc for 2 hours, your eyes start playing tricks. You see ghosts in the peripheral. I opened my eyes. The star was still there. Then it jerked upward. Not a drift, not an orbit. It moved in a sharp, impossible right angle, defying every law of celestial mechanics I knew, and then froze. My mouth went dry. The taste of copper filled my throat. "Bridge," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the small space of the helmet. "Sol, are we firing thrusters? I'm seeing movement." "Negative, Banks. Station is holding station keeping. Gyros are stable." "Something's moving out here," I said, squinting. "Probably debris, a loose bolt catching the sun. Don't let your imagination run the clock, Banks. Come inside." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then the darkness shifted. It started at the edge of my vision. 1 light moved, then 10, then 100. The star field wasn't static anymore. It was swarming. The lights began to roil and cluster, breaking apart and reforming like a colony of bacteria under a microscope slide. They were organizing. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, stinging my eyes, but I couldn't wipe it away. The vast emptiness of space suddenly felt crowded, claustrophobic. "Sol," I said, and I hated the tremor in my voice. "Check the long-range telemetry. Now! I told you, telemetry is… Sol cut off. There was a burst of static, sharp and angry. Then silence. Sol? Return to the airlock, Sol's voice came back, but the tone had changed. It was hollow now, strained. Immediately. That is a direct order, Banks. What is it? What's on the scope? Move! I grabbed the tether, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I disengaged the magnetic clamps on my boots, preparing to haul myself back hand over hand. That's when the light changed. One of the stars directly in front of me began to swell. It wasn't burning with the clean white heat of a sun. It was pulsing. The light shifted spectrum, turning a sickly, bruised purple, then a violent violet that made my teeth ache. It grew rapidly, silently, rushing toward the station with impossible speed. It wasn't a ship. There was no metal, no thruster burn. A shadow fell over me. Something massive blocked out the rest of the universe. It was huge, miles wide, and it didn't reflect light. It absorbed it. I looked up, paralyzed, as the violet light illuminated the underside of the thing. It looked wet. Panic, cold and primal, seized my chest. I scrambled, my clumsy gloved hands slipping on the smooth tether. I yanked myself toward the airlock, my boots scraping uselessly against the hull. Around me, the swarm closed in. They weren't stars. They were eyes. Thousands of them, circling the station, watching me struggle like a fly caught in a jar. The airlock cycle seemed to take 100 years. I stood there, shaking, watching the pressure gauge climb painfully slowly. The hiss of incoming atmosphere started as a whisper and grew into a deafening roar, assaulting ears that had grown accustomed to the silence of the void. When the green light finally pinged, I didn't wait for the chime. I slammed the release override and tore my helmet off. The air inside the station hit me. It smelled of stale coffee, machine oil, and something else. Sour fear. I stumbled into the prep room, my heavy EVA suit clumsy and burdensome in the artificial gravity. My hair was plastered to my skull with sweat. I stripped the gloves off, throwing them into the corner, and keyed the door to the main corridor. It was too quiet. Usually the station hummed. The life support scrubbers, the vibration of the cooling pumps, the chatter of the relay. It was a constant industrial symphony. Now there was almost nothing. Just a low-frequency thrum in the floor plates that vibrated up through the soles of my boots, unsettling my stomach. The main lights were dead. The corridor was bathed in the sickly amber glow of the emergency backup strips, casting long, grotesque shadows that seemed to stretch and twist on the bulkheads. I ran toward the bridge, my magnetic boots clanking heavily on the grating. "Saul! Hudson!" The door to the command deck slid open with a grinding protest. Saul was standing at the main tactical table, his back to me. His posture was wrong. He was hunched over, his shoulders tight up to his ears, staring down at a blank console. The main viewport, a 10-foot sheet of reinforced transparasteel that usually offered a view of the nebula, was sealed. The blast shutters were down, a wall of gray steel blocking out the universe. "You saw it," I rasped, leaning against the doorframe to catch my breath. "Tell me you saw it." Saul slowly turned around. He looked 10 years older than he had at breakfast. His face was gray, drained of blood, and his eyes were wide, pupils dilated so much they were almost black. He was chewing on his lower lip, a nervous habit, but he had done it so hard, a trickle of blood was running down his chin. "Protocol 7, Saul muttered. His voice was flat. "Isolation protocol." "What the hell was that thing out there?" I demanded, stepping into the room. "Sensors indicated a radiation storm," Saul said, reciting the words like a broken machine. "Gamma burst. High intensity. We had to close the shutters." "Bullshit," I snapped. "I was out there, Saul. That wasn't radiation, that was something else. It looked at me." Hudson was sitting in the corner, wedged between the comms rack and the wall. The life support engineer was a skinny guy, usually nervous, but now he looked on the verge of a psychotic break. He was hugging his knees, rocking slightly. His heel tapped a frantic rhythm against the floor. Tap, 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 tap. "Cameras don't work," Hudson whispered, staring at the floor. "They don't work, Banks. It's just noise. White noise." I walked over to the main console. All the screens were black. No star charts, no external feeds, just dead static. I reached for the shutter controls. "Don't," Saul said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "I need to see what's out there. We need to know if the hull is intact." I punched in my override code. Access denied. A red banner flashed across the small terminal screen. External threat, unknown classification. "Saul, unlock the shutters," I said, turning to him. "No," Saul said, his voice trembling. He gripped the edge of the tactical table so hard his knuckles were white. "If we can't see it, maybe it can't see us. We have to be quiet. Just quiet." "We are sitting ducks," I shouted, the frustration boiling over. "If that thing is hostile—" Suddenly, the station screamed. It wasn't an alarm. It was the metal itself. A long, drawn-out, agonizing groan that vibrated through every bolt and beam of the structure. The floor jumped beneath us. It sounded like a submarine diving past its crush depth, the sound of high-tensile titanium alloy being squeezed by a giant, invisible fist. Dust rained down from the ceiling vents. A coffee mug rattled off a desk and shattered. Hudson let out a whimper and covered his head with his arms. I grabbed the edge of a console to steady myself. The sound shifted, changing from a groan to a rhythmic crunching, like someone crumpling an aluminum beer can, but amplified 1,000 times. Saul suddenly snapped. He slammed his fist down onto the plastic keyboard of his console, shattering the keys. Plastic shards flew across the room. "Nobody opens the windows!" Saul screamed, spit flying from his mouth, his eyes wild and unfocused. "We stay inside. We keep the air in. We sit quietly until it goes away." "It's not going away, Saul," I yelled back, stepping into his personal space. "It's squeezing us." "It's just a storm," Saul shrieked, his composure completely shattered. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw total madness behind his eyes. "Just a storm." I looked at the blast shutter. The heavy steel plate was vibrating. The infirmary was the only place on the station that didn't feel like a tomb, mostly because it smelled like rubbing alcohol and iodine instead of fear. Kira was there, calm as ice, organizing supplies. I sat on the edge of the examination table while she dabbed antiseptic on a scrape I'd gotten on my arm during the scramble through the airlock. I hadn't even felt it happen. "Saul's pulse is 140, Kira said, her voice clinical, devoid of emotion. She didn't look up from my arm.
He's operating on pure adrenaline. Give him an hour, he'll crash. He knows something, I said, watching the orange emergency light reflect off her surgical instruments. He's the commander. He has access to the classified databanks. The look on his face. He wasn't surprised, Kira. He was terrified, but he wasn't surprised. Kira paused, holding a piece of gauze. She looked at me then, her pale blue eyes analyzing me like I was a specimen. Denial is a powerful sedative, Banks. He's trying to rationalize the irrational. We all are. I felt the walls closing in. The station, usually a sprawling labyrinth of 5 decks, felt tiny. I looked at the bulkhead wall next to me. It was cold to the touch. I pressed my ear against the metal, closing my eyes. I expected the hum of machinery. Instead, I heard wetness. It was a faint, rhythmic slithering sound. Slap, drag, slap, drag. Like a massive, wet slug moving across the external hull. It was circling us, exploring. I pulled away, rubbing my ear as if the sound had contaminated me. You hear that? I hear the hull settling, Kira said, tossing the bloody cotton into a bin. But her hand shook, just for a fraction of a second. She heard it too. I slid off the table. I need eyes. I can't work blind. Saul locked the bridge, but he forgot about the server room maintenance hatch. Hudson is in there. I found Hudson sitting on the floor of the server room, surrounded by stripped wires and circuit boards. The air here was hot, filled with the smell of ozone. No, not ozone. That was the wrong word. It smelled like overcooked meat and copper. Burnt wiring. Hudson was holding a tablet, his fingers twitching as he tried to bypass the camera lockout. I saw the last frame, Hudson whispered without looking up. Before the system crashed. The aft sensor array. It grabbed a single frame. He turned the tablet toward me. The image was grainy, filled with digital artifacts, but clear enough to stop my heart. It wasn't space. It wasn't stars. The camera had been looking straight out into the void, but the void was gone. Pressed against the lens was a texture. It was fibrous, pink and gray, woven with thick, ropey veins. It looked like the inside of a cheek magnified 1,000 times. We aren't in a nebula, Hudson said, his voice trembling so hard the words chopped up. We're inside something. We've been swallowed. I stared at the image. The scale of it was impossible. Or we're being held, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Like an egg in a hand. I grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from the wall rack. The weight of the steel felt good, solid, real. Where are you going? Hudson asked, eyes wide. Cabin 4, I said. It has a manual shutter override, mechanical crank, no electronics. Saul said, Saul is losing his mind. I need to see. I marched down the corridor, the wrench tight in my grip. The station groaned again, louder this time, the floor tittling 5 degrees to the port side before settling back. Saul intercepted us in the hallway outside the crew quarters. He looked disheveled, his uniform unzipped, sweat staining his collar. In his hand, he held the standard-issue stun baton. "Get back to your posts," Saul hissed. "Authorized personnel only." "I'm checking the hull integrity, Saul. Get out of my way." "You'll breach containment. You'll let it in." He raised the baton, the tip crackling with blue electricity. "There is no containment," I shouted. "Look at the walls, Saul! They're bending!" Saul swung. It was a clumsy, desperate strike. I stepped inside his guard, feeling the static discharge make the hair on my arm stand up, and shoved him hard in the chest.
He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. The baton clattered to the floor, skittering away. Saul hit the wall and slid down, curling into a ball. "Don't," he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "Please don't look at it. If you see it, it becomes real." I ignored him. I stepped up to the viewport in cabin 4. I slotted the wrench handle into the manual crank of the blast shutter and started to turn. The gears ground together, protesting, squealing against the rust and the pressure. Slowly, agonizingly, the metal plate began to rise. The squeal of the gears sounded like a scream in the small cabin. The heavy steel shutter retracted inch by inch, revealing the armored glass beneath. I stopped cranking. The wrench hung heavy in my hand. Behind me, I heard Kira gasp. Even Hudson, who had followed us despite his terror, went silent. There were no stars. There was no black vacuum. The view outside the window was suffocating. The glass was pressed against a wall of pulsating, translucent flesh. It was a pale, sickly lilac color, threaded with dark, thrumming veins as thick as tree trunks. A thick, viscous fluid filled the space between the station's hull and this tissue. We were suspended in jelly. Floating in the fluid were the stars I had seen earlier. They were bioluminescent nodes growing on long, waving stalks that sprouted from the fleshy walls. They drifted lazily in the slime, glowing with a hypnotic, cold blue light. They looked like the lures of deep-sea anglerfish, beautiful and deadly. "It's a cell structure," Kira whispered, stepping closer to the glass, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "Macrocellular biology. We are inside a giant organ." "Or a stomach," Hudson whimpered. One of the glowing nodes drifted closer to the glass. It was about the size of a beach ball. As it neared the light from our cabin, I saw the texture of it. It wasn't just a light. It was a semi-transparent sac filled with swirling phosphorescent liquid. And in the center of it, a dark, dense nucleus that looked uncomfortably like a pupil. It rotated. The pupil locked onto me. The light inside the node shifted instantly from blue to an angry, burning red. "It reacts to movement," I said softly. "Or heat." Suddenly, the wall of flesh outside convulsed. The entire station lurched violently. I was thrown against the bunk frame, my shoulder slamming into the metal. The sound was deafening, a wet, tearing noise followed by the screech of twisting metal. "We are food," Hudson laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. "We're just a pill it swallowed. A little titanium pill." "Shut up, Hudson!" I pulled myself up. Outside, the red light intensified. The flesh around the glowing node tightened, muscles contracting. Crack! The sound was sharp and absolute, like a gunshot. A spider-web fracture appeared in the center of the armored glass. It was 3 inches thick, rated to withstand meteor impacts. But under the pressure of that muscular wall, it was failing. "Back!" I yelled, grabbing Kira by her vest. "Everybody out!" Another crack. The fracture spread, branching out to the edges of the frame. A single drop of the outside fluid squeezed through the microscopic gap. It hit the floor with a hiss. It didn't just sit there.
It sizzled, eating into the floor plating, sending up a wisp of acrid yellow smoke that smelled of sulfur and rotten eggs. "Seal the door!" Saul screamed from the hallway, scrambling to his feet. "Seal it, now!" I shoved Hudson and Kira into the corridor and grabbed the manual crank again, trying to force the shutter back down. It was jammed. The pressure from outside was warping the frame. The glass groaned. The red light was blinding now, bathing the cabin in the color of blood. I abandoned the crank and bolted into the hallway, slamming the heavy bulkhead door behind me and spinning the locking wheel just as the viewport in the cabin exploded. We heard the rush of fluid, the sizzle of acid, and the thud of something heavy and wet slamming against the door we had just sealed. Banks and Kira worked in a frenzy, their hands slick with sweat, cranking the emergency bolts on the bulkhead door until the seal engaged with a heavy metallic thud. The sound of fluid rushing against the other side was audible, a wet, heavy sloshing, like a tide coming in against a pier, but heavier, more viscous. The overhead speakers crackled to life. "Attention! Structural integrity compromised in Sector C. Atmospheric breach detected." The automated voice was terrifyingly calm, a pristine female alto that had no business announcing our deaths. "We need to get to Central," I said, grabbing my welding kit. "It's the most shielded point."
We moved fast. The temperature in the station was climbing rapidly. It wasn't just the life support failing. It was body heat, not ours. Its. The air was becoming thick, humid, and cloying, carrying a smell that choked the back of the throat. It smelled like a slaughterhouse left in the sun, mixed with the sharp tang of battery acid. We found Saul sitting on the floor in the main junction corridor. He was staring at a puddle of condensation, or sweat, dripping from a ceiling pipe. "It's begun to secrete," Saul said. His voice was dead, stripped of all command authority. He didn't look up. "Digestive enzymes. It realized we aren't part of it, so now it's breaking us down." "Get up, Saul." I grabbed him by the harness of his uniform and hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight. "Look!" Hudson pointed a shaking finger at the ceiling. Where the steel plates of the ceiling joined, a thick yellow substance was seeping through the rivets. A single drop grew heavy and fell. It landed on the plastic folding table we used for sorting mail. Hiss. The reaction was violent. The plastic didn't just melt, it boiled. Bubbles of black sludge erupted as the yellow fluid ate through the table, then the rug, and finally scarred the metal decking beneath. A plume of smoke rose up, stinging my eyes. It smelled of rotten eggs and burnt sugar, a chemical sweetness that made me gag. "Ventilation!" I shouted, coughing into my elbow. "If that stuff vaporizes, the fumes alone will liquidate our lungs before the hull even breaches. We have to seal the vents." Kira was already moving. "I'll grab the rebreathers from emergency stores. Banks, you and Hudson get the sealant foam." Hudson was paralyzed. He was staring at the drop of acid on the floor, his eyes tracking the smoke as it curled upward. I stepped in front of him and slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed in the corridor. "Hey!" I shouted, grabbing his face. "Look at me. You want to dissolve? You want to end up as soup for that thing?" Hudson blinked, tears streaming down his dusty cheeks. "No," he squeaked. "Then find the industrial sealant. Now!" As we worked, the soundscape of the station shifted. The metallic groans were gone, replaced by a continuous, wet, sizzling sound. It was like being inside a deep fryer. The external plating was being eaten away, layer by micron layer. We were running towards Sector C's junction when the wall gave way. It didn't explode inward. It dissolved. A section of the bulkhead, weakened by the external bath, simply lost its cohesion. A jet of the yellow fluid sprayed into the corridor under immense pressure. It hit the opposite wall, stripping the conduit covers and melting the power cables instantly. Sparks showered down into the acid, flashing like fireworks before being snuffed out. "Back!" I roared, diving for cover behind a crate of supplies. The main lights died with a whining power-down noise. A second later, the emergency crimson rotating lights kicked in. The hallway was bathed in a strobing, hellish red. Shadows elongated and spun, making it look like the walls were breathing. And maybe they were. Through the breach in the wall, I could see it. The purple flesh was pushing inside, bulging through the melted gap like a hernia. It made a wet, sucking sound, sh-thuck, sh-thuck, as it squeezed into our space. "It's coming in," Hudson whispered, clutching a canister of foam he was too scared to use. "Oh God, it's coming in." We retreated to the med bay. It was the most reinforced room on the station, designed to double as a quarantine bunker or a radiation shelter. The door was heavy, lead-lined, and airtight. Inside, the heat was oppressive. The thermostat on the wall read 115 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. We had stripped down to our undershirts. My skin was slick with sweat, my hair matted against my forehead. It felt like a sauna, but the air was heavy with the taste of copper. Kira was at the microscope, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lens. She had managed to scrape a sample of the yellow fluid onto a slide before we sealed the door. "This isn't just acid," she said, her voice tight. She adjusted the focus. "Come look at this, Banks." I stepped up to the scope. On the digital display, I saw chaos. It wasn't a chemical reaction, it was biological warfare. Tiny, aggressive, amoeba-like structures were swarming the sample of metal she had introduced. They weren't just melting it, they were dismantling it, atom by atom, and repurposing the material. "Viral biology," Kira wiped sweat from her upper lip. "Whatever this thing is, it doesn't just eat, it converts. It's trying to rewrite the station's molecular structure to match its own. It's turning the titanium into bone, the plastic into cartilage." The walls of the medbay vibrated. Thump, thump. Something heavy was slamming against the hull outside. It sounded like wet slabs of meat being slapped against the floor. "We have maybe 4 hours before the hull integrity fails completely," Hudson said. He was huddled by the oxygen scrubbers, checking the readouts. "But the air won't last that long. The intake filters are clogged with organic matter. We're breathing recycled poison." I looked around the room, my mind racing. We were trapped in a tin can that was being digested. We needed a way out, or a way to make it spit us out. "The reactor," I said. "The orientation thrusters run off a small nuclear pile. If we override the cooling dampeners, we can create a thermal runaway." Kira looked up. "You want to cause a meltdown?" "Not a full meltdown, a thermal spike. We make the station hot, too hot to hold, like biting into a burning coal. It might trigger a regurgitation reflex." "No!" Saul scrambled up from the corner. He had been quiet for an hour, staring at the wall. Now his eyes were wide, manic. "If we hurt it, it will crush us," Saul shouted. "We can't fight it. Look at the scope. It's superior. It's efficient." He walked toward the ventilation grate near the floor. A thick blue slime was oozing through the slats. It was glowing softly, the same bioluminescence we saw outside.
"Don't touch that, Saul," I warned, raising the heavy wrench I still carried. Saul dropped to his knees before the grate. The blue slime dripped onto the floor, pooling near his legs. It didn't sizzle. It didn't burn. It pulsed. Saul reached out. "Saul, don't!" Kira yelled. He touched the slime. I expected him to scream. I expected his hand to dissolve. Instead, the slime reacted instantly. It shot up his arm, moving against gravity, soaking into the fabric of his uniform. But it wasn't burning him. It was sinking into him. The veins in Saul's neck bulged, turning a bright neon blue. He gasped, arching his back, his eyes rolling up into his head. "It's not pain," Saul whispered. His voice sounded wet, bubbly, like his throat was filling with fluid. He turned to face us. The transformation was immediate. The capillaries in his eyes had burst, flooding the whites with blue ink. His skin was becoming translucent, and beneath it I could see things moving. Tiny, wriggling fibers knitting his flesh to the alien matter. "It doesn't want to kill us," Saul said, smiling. His teeth were stained blue. "It wants to know us. It's lonely. It's so ancient and lonely." I backed away until my spine hit the supply cabinet. Saul stood up, but the movement was wrong. It was too fluid. His joints seemed to bend in arcs rather than angles. "Stay back," Kira ordered, snatching a scalpel from the tray. It was a pathetic weapon against a man who was rapidly becoming a monster, but it was all she had. Saul took a step. His boots left sticky blue footprints that glowed on the tile. "Why do you resist? The integration is euphoric. The silence is gone. I can hear the stars singing." "He's compromised," I said, gripping the wrench until my knuckles turned white. "That's not Saul anymore." "Join us," Saul said, extending a hand. His fingers were lengthening, the nails falling off to reveal sharp, bone-white tips. Hudson panicked. He grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the rack and hurled it at Saul with a scream of terror. Saul didn't flinch. He caught the heavy steel tank with one hand, stopping it dead in the air. His arm rippled, muscles rearranging to absorb the impact. He looked at the tank, confused, then tossed it aside as if it were made of styrofoam. It dented the wall. "Pain is just the first step of understanding," Saul gurgled. The walls of the medbay began to buckle inward. The white panels cracked, and through the fissures, purple moss began to sprout, growing aggressively fast. The room was shrinking. "We have to get to the reactor," I said to Kira. "Now!" "Through him?" she asked. I looked around. On the wall was the fire safety kit. "Cover your eyes!" I lunged for the fire extinguisher, ripped the pin out, and squeezed the trigger. A blast of white chemical foam sprayed directly into Saul's face. He howled, a sound that was half-human, half-animal roar. He clawed at his eyes, the foam momentarily blinding him. "Run!" I shouted. I shoulder-checked Saul as I ran past, knocking him into the counter. He felt like hitting a bag of wet sand, dense and unyielding. We burst into the corridor. It was unrecognizable. The metal grating of the floor was gone, replaced by a spongy, undulating mat of dark tissue. The walls were pulsing rhythmically. It felt like we were running down the throat of a beast. The heat was unbearable now. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, mixing with the organic stench. We slipped and stumbled on the slick surface. "Keep moving," I yelled, dragging Hudson by his collar. "Don't stop!"
Hudson lost his footing. He stepped on a patch of the floor that looked darker than the rest. The floor reacted. It wasn't a hole. It was a mouth. The organic matter snapped shut around Hudson's left leg, just above the ankle. It contracted instantly, like a sphincter. "Banks!" Hudson screamed, falling forward, his face slamming into the slime. I spun around and grabbed his outstretched hand. Kira grabbed his belt. We pulled. The floor wouldn't let go. It was chewing. "Help me! It's burning!" Hudson shrieked, thrashing wildly. The floor rippled, dragging him backward. I dug my heels into the soft, fleshy ground, trying to find purchase, but I was sliding. Below the knee, I heard a sound that will haunt me until I die. A wet crunch. The sound of a tibia snapping under hydraulic pressure. "Pull him!" I screamed at Kira, my muscles tearing with the effort. But the station was stronger. We hauled on Hudson until my shoulders felt like they were dislocating. He was screaming, a raw, tearing sound that scraped against my nerves. Hudson looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horrific clarity. The veins in his neck were turning purple. The infection moved fast. The floor was injecting him with the same agents that had taken Saul. "Let go," Hudson wheezed. Blood trickled from his nose. "It's inside me." "No, we can pull you out," I lied. "Go," Hudson gasped. He looked past me, down the throbbing corridor where Saul, or the thing that used to be Saul, was rising from the foam, stumbling toward us. "Blow the reactor. Burn this bastard." Suddenly, the floor convulsed. Hudson was yanked down with violent force. He vanished into the meat of the deck with a wet slurp, leaving only one of his boots behind. I stood there, staring at the spot where he had been. The floor smoothed over, looking innocent and unbroken. "Banks!" Kira grabbed my arm, shaking me. "He's gone! We have to move!" I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and turned. We ran. We reached the bulkhead to engineering. The door was jammed, the frame twisted by the station's deformation. The control panel was fused into a lump of useless plastic. "Stand back," I said. My voice sounded hollow. I unclipped the cutting torch from my belt. It was heavy, reassuring. I dialed the mixture to maximum. I ignited the arc. The blue-white flame roared to life. I jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame. It didn't smell like burning metal. It smelled like cauterized flesh. The door screamed as I cut, the metal bleeding a thick black ichor. I kicked the locking mechanism and the door swung inward with a groan. We spilled into engineering. It was cleaner here, but the Geiger counter on my belt began to click frantically. Click, 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 click. The shielding around the reactor core had been compromised by the acid. "Radiation is spiking," Kira said, checking the main console. Her face was pale, slick with sweat. "We're taking a year's dose every minute." "Can we trigger the overload?" Kira's fingers flew across the keyboard. "The remote safeties are offline. I have to do it manually. I have to bypass the control rods physically at the terminal, then initiate the sequence." "Do it." "Banks," she said, not looking up. "Once I start the sequence, the containment magnetic bottle collapses. The thermal bloom will be instantaneous in this room. There's no time to run to the escape pods." Before I could answer, a noise from the doorway made us turn. The gap I had cut in the door was filling up. The purple biomass was pouring in, but it wasn't shapeless anymore. It was knitting itself together,
rising up like a wall of wax. From the center of the mass, a face pushed out. It was 5 feet wide, distorted and stretched, but it was Saul. His eyes were gone, replaced by glowing blue pits. His mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like protrusions. "Become," the wall boomed. The voice didn't come from the mouth. It vibrated through the floor, through my teeth. "Join the eternity. No pain, only unity." Kira looked at me. She pointed to the waste disposal chute on the far wall, a small airlock used for jettisoning trash and spent probes. "Get in," she said. "What?" "It's the only way out. I have to stay to hold the button. The sequence requires a manual override until detonation. If I let go, the safeties kick back in." "No," I said, stepping toward her. "We do it together." "Look at me, Banks." She turned. Blood was already leaking from her tear ducts. "The radiation is already cooking me. I'm dead. Don't make it pointless." The Saul wall surged forward, a tendril of flesh whipping out to smash a console. Kira shoved me toward the chute. "Go! You have 30 seconds!" "I'm not leaving you!" I shouted, fighting her grip. "You are!"
She was surprisingly strong. She slammed her palm against the chute's control panel. The hatch hissed open. It was a dark, cramped steel tube, smelling of old refuse and cold vacuum. "Make sure someone knows what happened here. Tell them not to come looking." She pushed me. I stumbled backward into the chute. Before I could scramble out, she slammed the manual close lever. The hatch spun shut. I banged on the thick glass of the porthole. "Kira, open it!" Inside the engineering bay, Kira didn't look back. She turned to the console. Her hands were steady as she began typing the suicide code. Through the small, reinforced window, I saw the biomass surge. The soul thing rolled over the railings, engulfing the lower deck. Tendrils of wet, purple flesh whipped around Kira's ankles, climbing her legs. She didn't flinch. She just typed. "Initiating core dump," the computer voice announced inside my chute speakers. "Thermal runaway in 10, 9. The soul face screamed. It was a sound of pure frustration. The walls of the engineering bay began to blister. The paint peeled and curled. I saw Kira smile. It was a grim, bloody smile. She looked right at the soul thing as it reared up to swallow her, and she pressed the final key. "Goodbye, Banks," she whispered over the comms. I punched the jettison button on my panel. Thud. The explosive bolts fired, but they sounded muffled. The pod jerked, moved 6 inches, and stopped. I froze. Through the external camera feed on my tiny screen, I saw it. Thick, ropey tentacles from the creature had wrapped around the hull of the station, covering the waste port. It was holding the pod in. It wouldn't let me go. Inside the engineering bay, the air turned to fire. I saw Kira vanish in a flash of white light as the containment field dropped. The soul creature shrieked as it burned. The explosion wasn't a fireball. It was a pulse of pure kinetic and thermal energy. The shockwave hit the station from the inside out. The grip on my pod didn't just loosen, it was blown away. The creature expanded like a balloon being overfilled. The pressure wave forced the blockage clear. My pod was fired out of the chute like a bullet from a gun, riding a wave of vaporized metal, boiling blood, and hard radiation.
The G-force slammed me back into the padded seat. My vision grayed out. The last thing I saw was the station swelling, glowing bright orange, a star being born in the gut of a monster. I woke up to the sound of my own ragged breathing and the incessant, high-pitched beeping of the proximity alarm. The pod was tumbling. The artificial gravity was gone, leaving me floating against the restraints. My head pounded with a migraine that felt like a nail being driven into my skull. I reached out with a trembling hand and stabilized the pod's gyros. The spinning stopped. The nausea remained. I looked out the forward port. The station was a wreck. It wasn't destroyed, not completely. The explosion had ruptured the creature's stomach. The massive, translucent entity was convulsing in the void, its side torn open. Glowing fluid, gallons of it, spilled into space, freezing instantly into glittering crystals. The station's skeleton protruded from the wound like broken ribs. The creature was dying. Its violet light was fading to a dull, bruised gray. It drifted away, pushed by the force of the blast, shrinking against the backdrop of the cosmos. I leaned back, tears stinging my eyes. Sol, Hudson, Kira, all gone. I checked the comms. Mayday, Mayday. This is Banks, survivor of Station 4, requesting immediate assist. Static. Then a voice cut through. Clear. American. Station 4 survivor, this is Patrol Cruiser Vanguard. We see your flare. We have a lock on your beacon. Hold tight, son. We're coming to get you. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for hours. I was alive. I looked past the wreckage, out into the deep field. The stars were there. Hard, diamond chips of light. Cold, distant, beautifully motionless. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They were just stars. I rubbed my wrist. Itched. It was a deep, nagging itch right on the radial artery where I had scraped my arm hours ago. Or was it days? I pulled back the cuff of my suit. There was no scrape. The skin had healed over, leaving no scar. But beneath the skin, I stared in horror. Deep in the tissue, nestled against the vein, was a tiny, faint point of light. It was blue. It pulsed. Thump, thump. It beat in perfect sync with my heart. I rubbed it furiously, digging my nails in, trying to scrape it out, but it was deep. It was part of me. I froze. A cold realization washed over me, colder than the void outside. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a carrier. A seed. I looked up at the viewport again. The patrol cruiser Vanguard was approaching, its running lights growing larger. They were coming to take me home. To Earth. To billions of people. And as I watched the rescue ship approach, I saw the stars behind it. One of them twitched. Then another. They weren't moving, I knew that. But I was changing. The connection was already there. I closed my eyes, and I could hear them singing.